That's cool.
Hey everyone, this is Press Any Button and we're back with another part of our action adventure series. Today's part's going to be a bit different. Obviously this is different, and also the fact that I'm going to be doing post-com over my videos instead of doing it as I do it. Hopefully that should make the whole learning experience a bit smoother for you guys and also help me actually get some videos out for once. Now let's just jump straight into it. You can see that I have an enemy type on my screen and that I'm in Blender. And this is kind of where you want to get yourself to. So coming into this tutorial, you want to make sure that 4 things are done. You've got an enemy model, you've rigged that model, you've texture painted that model, and you've animated that model. And your 4 animations that you'll want are an idle animation, a walking animation, an attack animation, and a recoil animation. And the reason why I haven't gone over all of that is because we've covered it in previous parts. So if it is daunting, do go back to parts of this tutorial where we worked with our player game object, how we created that, how we animated that, because you'll just have to implement the same exact skills. I didn't want to do a repeat of that. But once you're at this point, or if you've downloaded the package, you should be kind of at this point. You can see that I've got my enemy in front of me and I'm going to let some of their animations play out. So you see an idle animation, a couple other animations, but the big one is the recoil animation. The reason why we'll be working on the recoil animation is because we're going to be switching textures during that animation, and that's why we've gone back to implementing aesthetics here, because I just wanted to show you that little thing and how to properly export your characters from Blender into Unity, because we didn't really cover that last time. So to continue, when you work with multiple textures in Blender, you'll want to really see how your texture's interacting with your game object or your model. So I'm going to go into edit mode, double tap A so I have everything highlighted. I go to the materials tab, and then in the materials tab I'm going to create my new texture. The base color, it's going to be an image texture, and we do all the rest of the stuff just the same. I'm going to keep the resolution low because this is just for demonstration's sake. But once I've created that material, I can then hit assign with everything selected to actually see how that material is interacting with our game object. And you can see that I can do it with my hurt melee material, which is how they're going to look when they take a hit. So you'll want 2 materials on your enemy game object. You'll want one where they just kind of look normal, and then you'll want one where they look like they've been hurt. And now that you can actually view your texture in the viewport, you can edit that texture and work with it just as you would your other material, and make sure that things don't look goofy for the end product. So we're going to get out of that, we're going to get out of the edit mode, and I'm going to take you over to the shading window so that we can get some exports done. So really quick simple steps for exporting: file, external data, pack all into .blend. I've got an extra option just because I created that material, I didn't save it as I should have, but we can ignore that. And then uno mas, we're going to go file, external data, and then we're going to go into make all paths relative. And then finally we'll do it one more time, external data, and this time we'll click unpack all into files, use files in current directory. So that's going to put your files, all your textures, in the current directory you're using. For me that's my documents, so that's pretty useful. I'll know where they are. I can move them over, manipulate them if I need them in the future. Now we're going to export our entire enemy. So we simply go to File, Export, FBX, and then we're going to go with the following settings. So where it says forward, we don't want -Z forward, but we want Z forward. And we'll go to the options underneath that are highlighted in blue. And all we want highlighted in blue are armature and mesh. So where it says armat, we're going to click, hold shift, and then click again. And finally we're going to check apply transform. Go over to geometry, nothing we need to change here. We can keep our modifiers as they are if we want to apply them, if we had any. And then armature, only deform bones and get rid of add leaf bones. In animation we'll get rid of those NLA strips, and then force start and end keying, we'll get rid of that. And then we're good to go to export that as an FBX. Now remembering the location for your FBX will be important because you'll need it in a second. Now we're back in Unity. Importing our character will just be the same as we've always done it. So we'll find our character in our assets folder if that's where we exported them to when we hit export. From our assets folder, we can go to the animation tab. You can slice up all your animations. You can see that it's already done here for me. And then I drag my enemy into the hierarchy, which means that they're part of the scene now. I'm just going to reposition them so I can actually work with them, and I'm going to use my previous enemy type as a reference. Now at this point, if you're following this religiously, you're going to only have the capsule. You won't have this other enemy type to guide you. The capsule has absolutely everything that you need for this part. Don't delete the enemy capsule because that's going to help you just really quickly implement everything that you need to right now. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to our first other old enemy game object, and then we're going to find the canvas, which should be a child of that enemy game object. We're going to copy that and then paste it into the hierarchy, and then make it a child of our new enemy game object. And then once it's a child of that object, we're going to change the transforms to bring them to origin, and then we're going to make adjustments so that the health bar sits above our enemy. So I've just manipulated the transforms there, and the health bar sits above the enemy. And then we're going to add a couple more components. So I'm going to add a rigid body, and then we're going to freeze the rotation along all of the axes, X, Y, and Z. And we'll need a capsule collider because we don't want this thing to fall through the ground. It has a rigid body now, gravity will affect it, and we need that capsule collider for other things. So we've got the capsule collider, and I'm going to bring it up to center it out, and then we're going to increase the radius so that it covers our enemy game object. So 1 on the y-axis, 1 for the radius, but this will change, and the shape of the collider that you select will have to change according to the kind of enemy that you have. For me, I'm comfortable with using a capsule collider because my enemies are spherical, but you'll have to use different shapes of colliders for enemies that are different shapes. Now let's move on to the rest. So we want to add an animator to our game object. So we're going add component, animator, and then for the controller we'll select something in the scene that is relevant. So right here I'm going to choose one of the children of our current game object, but I could as easily have just used the game object itself. So I've got punch enemy there, so you can see that our game object now has an animator, which means that we can mess around with the animations, make transitions, all that good stuff. So there's no animations in the animator right now, so we'll have to drag those animations into that window. So I find the animations by expanding the drop down for my character in the assets folder where I have them. So wherever you have them in the project folders, just expand it out and you should be able to find all of their animations as children of them. Just drag those animations into their animator and you should be good to go. So I do punchy attack, punchy recoil, punchy idle, and punchy walk. And because I didn't add my animations in any particular order, it's going to want to default the entry animation to the first animation that was kind of in that list. So imagine there's kind of a queue of animations. New animation, the default one, was the one that began it all, so that's going to be the entry one. But then I deleted that and it went to my walk animation when I wanted it to be the idle one. So I just have to get rid of walk, rejigger some things, and then just bring those animations back into the window. So your entry should be tied to your idle. But before we conclude with that, we're going to add our last two scripts because they have references to the animator. So we'll need enemy health, enemy hurt, and then our enemy will be mostly set up. And here you can see that I'm assigning the correct slider. So I go over to the canvas and then open it up. I see the slider as a child of the canvas and I bring it into there. So I set up the recoil in enemy hurt, and I'm also setting up the target, which is going to be the player game object. Now I can go back to working with the animations. I can add a new parameter, and that's going to be a trigger. and it's going to be hurt recoil, and that will be in camel case. Next, we're going to edit the script in Visual Studio so I can show you what's actually happening here. Alright, so what have we added to our script since last time? Well, you can see there's a reference to the animator. So we've got in void start anim equals game object dot get component, and then we're going to use that in void on trigger enter to say every time that the enemy is hurt, so every time one of these cases play out where a stinger, a hit, or an aerial happens, we're going to set our hurt recoil trigger to true. Now we go back into Unity and set up our transitions between our animations. My first transition is going to occur between any state and the recoil animation, and then I'm going to make another transition to punch idle. Now I'll go over here and I'll add the condition that hurt recoil needs to be active for us to go into the recoil animation when we're hit. I chose any state because from any state we can take a hit from the player, and we can see here as I attack my enemy they play the recoil animation. But that's just the start of it. Things are about to get a lot more exciting. The exciting part being the part where we switch our texture when the animation plays out. But how are we going to do that though? Because we didn't handle it in Blender, and all of our animations that we've imported from Blender are read only. We got to get around that somehow. Well, fortunately we can actually duplicate those Blender animations in Unity and make it so that we can actually write to them or edit them. And the way to do that is incredibly simple. You just want to go over to your animations and find that recoil animation, which should be a child of your game object. And then once you've selected it, you'll hit Control D, and there you go. You have a read writable version of that animation. And I'm just going to change it here in the inspector so it says read write, and then we can see that there's no read only tag next to our animation. It's just punchy recoil and we're good to go. Now how are we going to switch this texture when the animation plays out? The first thing that we'll do is we'll hit this record button when we have our new animation in the animation tab. This means that it's going to record every action that we take and make it a part of this animation. So we go over to our enemy game object and we find the child of the game object which holds the mesh renderer. For me, it's punch enemy. Once I find that skinned mesh renderer, where it says materials, I'm going to go to the element at the top of the list where it has idle melee, and I'm going to switch the material that's being used. So I'll find my recoil material, which I've called hurt punchy, and you can see that it's highlighted it in red because it's actually recorded that action. And then I go again to the record button and I toggle that so that it deactivates. And now you can see that the animation's playing out with the new texture. So with that in mind, it is a new animation. We want to set up the transitions again. So from any state, transition into punchy recoil, read write, this new animation, and then transition into the idle animation. And the thing that will handle that first transition from any state into our recoil animation is the hurt recoil trigger. So make sure that that's the condition you set for that transition. Now finally we're going to test it out and see if it actually works, and you can see my character fidgeting there because he's getting smacked, and you can also see that he's not having a great time just from his expression. And now I'm just going to demonstrate with my gunner enemy here. Yep, he's not having a great time either, but we're having a great time because we're figuring these things out. This has been another Press Any Button tutorial. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. But as always, have fun, implement these things in your own projects, press on and keep creating.